Governor Whitmer, thank you for being here. You picked a doozy of a week to have your book come out, and we're going to get to all of that in a moment. But I do want to ask you about the state of Democratic politics right now. The New York Times editorial board has been fairly unstinting in their calls for President Biden to step out of this race. Today, they have another op-ed out today. And the figure that they sort of attach the most weight to is this polling number. The latest polling showing 74% of voters believe that Joe Biden is too old to serve. That is an increase of 5 percentage points since the debate. What does that number mean to you?
Well, I think it's important to recognize the debate did not go well, right? I think we all understand that.
Yeah.
What we've seen from this president since then, though, is an aggressive calendar. I went to Washington, D.C. with a number of my colleagues. We sat with them days after the debate, got a chance to see him. I spoke with him last Saturday with all of the co-chairs of the campaign. I mean, he is in it, and he is going to fight like hell to make sure that we continue the work that he has begun in this first term. I've got confidence in him, and I'm continuing to support him. I know that it rattled a lot of people. People saw that, and it shook them their worst concerns about, having two very older candidates running for this important office. And yet, he has been right on all the issues. He is ready to go. He's coming to Michigan at the end of this week, and I'm proud to be supporting the president. But he's got to prove to people he is up to the moment, and I think he's going to.
Yeah, I do wonder, though. I mean, 3/4 of the American public think he's too old. He's not going to get younger, right? Is that something he can outrun? Is that a perception he can shift between now and November, do you think?
The only way you shift it is by showing people what you're capable of, and that's exactly what he's doing. And I think that that's the right tack to take. You got to flood the zone, show people you are up to meeting this moment. And man, he is getting a lot done. He's got the receipts, and I think it's such a stark contrast. So I'm feeling pretty, solid about where we are, but obviously there's a lot of work to do.
I know you feel solid. There's some reporting in Axios today that a group of vulnerable swing state House Democrats had a meeting this morning, and the meeting was characterized as despondent with actual tears. Not tears for Joe Biden, but tears about the fact that he was staying in the race. These Democrats think they are next on the chopping block in November. What is your message to them as they try and grapple with the prospect of the president staying in the race and think that will decide their fortunes and not for good?
Well, the only one who's going to make a decision about whether or not the president's in the race is the president. He has made the decision. So now it's time to stop wringing our hands and roll up your sleeves. We got a lot of work to do, but we are capable of meeting this moment. There is no question in my mind. People are concerned about the cost of everything. So we got to remind them everything that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have done to put more money back in their pockets, whether it's bringing down the cost of insulin, rebuilding infrastructure, onshoring supply chains. We have a manufacturing boom happening in this country. It was not happening under the last guy. It's happened because of Joe Biden's leadership. Those are good paying jobs. That's what's at stake here. A woman's right to make her own decisions about her body and her health care. All of this is at stake. And so continuing to talk about what may or may not happen is all based on one person's decision. He's made his decision, so let's go.
So basically, stop your whining. Stop the crying, dry your tears, move on.
I'm not criticizing people who are concerned. I get it. But I also know that our success in November is dependent on all of us doing the hard work that we need to do, and that's what I'm going to stay focused on.
Can I ask you a question? Because there's been some back and forth about this quote that is being attributed to you in Politico, that you told Biden's campaign chair, Jen O'Malley Dillon, that after the debate, Michigan was no longer winnable for Joe Biden. Now, that has been attributed to someone close to a potential 2028 Whitmer rival for the Democratic presidential nomination. I think people have theories about who that might be. Do you have a theory? And what's your reaction to that quote?
I don't have a theory. All I can say is I think it's pretty irresponsible for anyone to publish something that is from a staff person from another potential rival down the road 4 years from now, attributing something that happened in a two-person conversation. Jen O'Malley Dillon called me, like she called a lot of people, checking in after the debate. I said it's always been tough in Michigan. No one would be surprised to hear that, because I've said it every year I've been alive. It is the truth. elections are always close in the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
We don't clutch our pearls and get all upset when we're down 2 points, and we don't celebrate when we're up 2 points. It is going to stay in the margin of error, so we got a lot of work to do. So I would never say that Michigan's unwinnable because it's fundamentally untrue.
Do you think it's going to be a narrower margin than it was in 2020? I think it was 147, 148,000 votes that separated Trump and Biden.
Well, in 2016, it was 11,000. In 2020, it was 150,000. When I won 2 years ago, I won by almost 11 points. You don't win that big a margin without getting a lot of crossover votes, without doing the hard work, showing up for people, reminding them what you've done to help make their lives better, a little easier. That's what this president has done. That's what we've got, the work we have yet to do in front of us. But I'm confident that we've got a powerful story to tell, and it's going to resonate with Michigan voters, Pennsylvania voters, Wisconsin voters alike.
When you talk about the work that's ahead, I see almost a glimmer in your eye. There's clearly like a happy warrior vibe happening here. And I wonder I'm not asking you to give the president advice, but what would you like to see from him in terms of a strategy moving forward beyond just talking about the great accomplishments of his administration with a very, very narrow Senate majority? I mean, just practically speaking in terms of personality, because, you've used humor to skewer your critics. You've used it against Donald Trump. I mean, how much should he talk about his age? How much should he use humor about his age? What's your sort of assessment about a game plan here?
Well, I always think some of the best advice is let Joe be Joe, right? Let Gretchen be Gretchen. I know that when I felt, that everyone was throwing so much at me, it was very hard to, show up as I am. And that's really important, to be able to connect with people. Joe Biden cares about people. He has dedicated his life to public service. He shows up in the hardest of circumstances, his own hard circumstances. He keeps showing up for other people, and I think that's going to be really important. The happy warrior persona is something that I've had to work at. It doesn't come naturally to say, all right, this is going to be fun. I love the fight. And yet,
I love the death threats. Sure.
Right. Bring it on. Let's go. But I think that's really important to show people, we're not afraid. He is not afraid. He has been doing this. He's dedicated his life to this work, and he's going to continue it, come hell or high water, and that's the point.
Do you like the posture he's adopted in recent days, which is like, only the Lord Almighty is getting me out of here. Buckle up, people. I'm in it to win it. Do you think that's the right sort of posture to adopt?
I think it is important for him to show a little swagger. And he's got the receipts. What can Donald Trump say about his time as president?
Yeah.
Well, we had hundreds of thousands of people die from COVID. We had an economy that was in dire straits. This President Biden, has got receipts. He can tell people what he's done for them. And I think that's an important part of it, and show a little swagger doing it.
You have taken on Trump in a way that few other people have. And certainly as a woman, you've been one of the most successful vanquishers of Trump and the dumb nicknames, etc. You write in the book, I refuse to let the president define me. I took his insult. That woman in Michigan is what he called you. I flipped it and made it my own. That is a secret to dealing with bullies. You take their weapon and you make it your shield. How does that apply, like, in this moment? I mean, when we talk about Trump and what he's doing and the threats he poses, it's very serious on some level. But how do you flip that script? How do you make people wake up to it and understand that Donald Trump is not the man best positioned to preserve democracy and lead the country?
Well, he's a very good salesperson. I'll give him a compliment on that front. But his actions do not follow his rhetoric. For instance, you see how he's just tried to change a little bit, make it a little softer, their platform when it comes to women's reproductive rights. But and I know, that he is the person who's responsible for Roe v. Wade getting, overturned. We know that he put 3 justices on the Supreme Court who lied to Congress, betrayed their oath, and ultimately, have the Dobbs decision came out because of their work. He took credit for it. He boasts it. Now he's trying to be softer on abortion.
Yeah.
Give me a break. We got to call it out. We got to say what it is and use plain language. People are smart, but they're busy. They're not consuming information like you and I are because they don't have the time. It's no fault of their own. It's just because they're trying to get the kids off to school, get to work on time, and put food on the table. So we got to help them understand and remember how high these stakes are and what really is at risk in this election.
You bring up the RNC platform and the way that they're now saying that it's a state-level issue, right? This is a change in where the party has been before. And I'm sensing, just in the fact that you want to talk about how to talk about abortion, that there is some concern that this Republican Party strategy can be successful, that it will convince especially lower information voters. The Republicans aren't that crazy on abortion, right? They just, they believe in states' rights, or they'll hear about, the softening of the platform, and that will be effective. I mean, how concerned should Democrats be that Republicans are playing on ignorance and betting that they can win on it?
Well, I think we can't assume everyone understands the high stakes on this particular front, or on a variety of fronts for that matter. We've got to make it very clear, and we've got to connect the dots for people. There is no way that women would be fighting just for their lives in some of these states if it weren't for Donald Trump and his appointees to the United States Supreme Court. We know that the Miffy-Pristone case can very much come back to life. We know that a standing or procedural reason for not rendering a judgment on these cases is all that stands between us and a whole new situation in this country where we can't access medical abortion or contraception for that matter. And guess what? They get rid of contraception, IVF. And guess what? If it's IVF, stem cell research and cures could be very well outlawed, in addition to a lot of other rights that we have that stem from, the substantive due process, like the right to marry who you love.
Yeah.
All of this is at risk, and we cannot lose sight of it. Republicans have been really good about saying it's all about the court, it's all about the court. And guess what? They've shown when you control the court, you control Americans' lives. The next president will have more appointees, and that's what we can't help people, lose sight of.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.